Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Thiru. I'm here with Rabbi John Franken in his beautiful porch just north of Johns Hopkins University. As we mentioned yesterday, we're going to be doing these daily briefings to make sure that we are providing some clear, compassionate leadership and some information to the folks in Baltimore as we make our way through together this global pandemic. I'm going to start each time with a little bit of an update with both local and global information. This is information that is being reported by other outlets as well. We just wanted to give you a quick recitation of it. And then we're going to talk a little bit and have a conversation with Rabbi Franken about the impact of this on his community, on his faith community, on his neighborhood community, and just have a little bit of a conversation about what this is, how this is impacting these communities and what we can do to help. But let me start with some information that folks should be aware of. First and foremost, the updated information is that we have 15 confirmed cases here in Baltimore as of March 21st, 2020, 190 in the state of Maryland, and according to the New York Times, nearly 18,000 countrywide. The numbers continue to nearly double in terms of confirmed cases every 2 to 3 to 4 days. This remains a serious epidemic, and each and every one of us can do something to help flatten the curve. We continue to encourage folks to listen to the public health officials, to follow the directives that are coming from local and state and federal government, and to take this seriously. It is a deadly virus, and even though it doesn't appear on its surface, because it has an incubation period that allows you to be symptom-free for a time, you can be a vector, you can be endangering your loved ones, especially older and immunocompromised individuals, without even knowing it. So please be smart, please be compassionate, and do the thing that all of our public health officials are asking us to do. I should note that the governor unfortunately reported the second death in the state of Maryland late last night. It was a Baltimore County resident. He was in his 60s, and it only underscores and reinforces how serious this is. Our hearts and our prayers go out to his family. Tragically, it is a marker of what is unfortunately to come, and we can again do our part. Pursuant to the governor's orders and the city's request, as many of you may have seen with your own eyes or seen on the local news, the National Guard did report to Baltimore yesterday. I also want to share some news at the federal level. Tax day has been moved from April 15th to July 15th, and federal educational loans will no longer collect interest for a time, and students can suspend their loan payments without penalty for the time being. At the local level, this of course is not our only crisis. We've had 5 homicides in the past week, in addition to 4 people who were shot late last night in 2 separate shootings. There's a lot to talk about, Rabbi Franken. This is obviously affecting us in many ways. Each time we talk, I want to try to highlight a subject that maybe isn't getting enough attention. So many of our faith communities have been shaken by how we practice, by how we hold our faith. I wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind sharing first a little bit about yourself, and then we'll sort of dive into how this is affecting the faith community. You're the former head of the Baltimore Board of Rabbis. How is this affecting your synagogue and your folks?
Dramatically, through like everywhere else, as far as I can tell. 2 weeks ago, I remember our Sabbath being the first that was a little bit different. We were no longer shaking hands, the elbow bump kind of thing, the nod, the eye contact, cutting bread rather than tearing. The following week, we stopped serving food after services and encouraged people to maintain social distance. And then this week, this Sabbath, which is today, we began not having services at all because of the governor's prohibition and just CDC guidelines and prudence. So we broadcast services via Zoom last night, and a lot of people tuned in. Probably 100, 150 people were in view online. So it's a dramatic change. Our buildings are really closed. I gave a Bible study, Torah study session this morning. Tomorrow we're moving to the same platform for religious school. We'll be meeting during the week in other ways. The Board of Rabbis has moved its Intro to Judaism class online as well, beginning Monday night.
Sounds like you guys are finding a way to cope, to compensate. Tell us a little bit about what that looks like. So many of us are learning about Zoom for the first time,
Right.
and are doing so many of our meetings, so many of our otherwise extracurricular activities with people across these platforms. What was that like? What was the reception of the folks that were able to tune in?
Well, it's really one of the beautiful outcomes, of the social media capability, using it in a positive way. It was very user-friendly, and the comments that we received already were extremely appreciative. In a very stressful week with, great feeling of kind of being unsettled and anxious. A lot of people felt very, uplifted because of the ability to connect even online and give a shout out to each other and encouragement and share good news too.
Rabbi, I don't want you to have to repeat it, but what was your message?
Well, we're very historical minded people with a history of more than 3,000 years. There have been plagues before.
Yeah.
In fact, we're coming into the new month when we celebrate Passover, and 10 plagues that affected Egypt that our people also experienced. And so pestilence, disease, plague isn't new.
Right.
And it's something we've written out before. It's a matter of holding our loved ones close, taking care of each other, showing a lot of love, and the best being brought out, and still seeking the holy. And just as the last plague, say, passed over us, thousands of years ago, the same thing will happen this time. And the important thing is to not lose our humanity, but rather to express it and care for one another.
I think faith communities, more than most, have an appreciation of keeping this in perspective, that communities have endured, in some respects, crises, plagues of the past. And I have heard many people say that in some ways, Baltimore as a community is as equipped as any to come together, because we've had to come together so many times around so many different tragedies. This is, of course, different in kind, different in character, different in scale.
Right.
It is part of a global pandemic. But I do hope that our resilience shows. And are you seeing that in the conversations you're having with your fellow Baltimoreans, whether it's over the phone or over Zoom?
I think people are really stepping up. Here in this little condominium building, we moved from occasional cleanings to now everybody is pitching in every day. We're wiping down all of our common touch points with a high 99.9% something germ killer. And people are just taking the appropriate measures, the 6-foot distance. You saw a sign as you entered our building, and crossing the street sometimes if we're passing someone. So there's obviously a whole adjustment going on throughout the city, and I'm really appreciative. I think we all are of our neighbors for showing that kind of civic responsibility, patriotism, and respect.
I really appreciate you being willing to have this conversation and to invite us into your home on the Sabbath. Are you having conversations with other rabbis? Are they doing similar things? What are the different approaches that different synagogues are taking?
Much more similar than different.
Yeah.
Some people might be a half step ahead of somebody else, but more or less there's a uniformity, and I believe in other faith communities as well, from my connections with colleagues in the Christian community, let's say. So almost everyone that I can tell has either canceled canceled them, or moved them to Zoom if that's a possibility for their community, same with classes. Obviously, those who are in need, if they're sick, homebound, we have other provisions for grocery shopping and really taking care of each other.
What are you worried about? What are you hearing from the folks in these conversations? What are they worried about?
I think I think folks are really worried about that curve, that bell curve, how steep or how flat we can get it. The possibility is with Italy of hospitals being overwhelmed, of healthcare workers being overwhelmed. We have a number of healthcare workers in our congregation, as most do. Some of our doctors already working very, very hard, and nurses, and we're worried for them, but we're worried for their families, the people they're in contact with. And I, as a spiritual leader, am worried about people's spiritual well-being, because being inside all week with no end in sight yet is profoundly kind of discomforting and worrisome.
I think for so many of us, where we have become accustomed to a routine, where we see people on the regular basis, we are interacting with our colleagues, with our loved ones, to have that be so dramatically changed almost overnight, it is shaken. I hear a lot of folks talking about the impact on people's psyche, on their spiritual well-being, on their mental well-being. What are you asking people to do as a spiritual leader, as a community leader? What kinds of things are you asking people to do to step up and assist?
Well, obviously, take care of yourself, first of all. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me is a fundamental Jewish precept. But and that means washing your hands, covering your cough, the usual health guidelines. But also, if I'm only for myself, what am I? And that means being there for others, and really being the best kind of neighbor and citizen you can be, and congregant. And for all of us, really, we're not meant to be isolated individuals. We can be physically isolated, but and social distancing doesn't have to mean socially isolated. Physical distancing, but not social. So connect with your community, be it your friends, your family, your church, synagogue, because there's great strength in community and togetherness as we're experiencing now.
I think we are all seeing that we have to strike this balance between wanting to reach out and help and realizing that we have to be mindful of the risks that come with that. I know some of the volunteer opportunities that are available in the city are modifying their protocols so that they are keeping the people that they are helping as safe as they can be, and also not raising the risk level for the people that are trying to help. Our team, our campaign is trying to come together and trying to do some good from time to time, but we are maintaining our distances. We are sanitizing everything that we touch. We are mindful of even our phones, lying around and making sure that there's wipes available to make this as viral-free an environment as possible. What has been your reaction overall? I mean, how have we fared? What is your reaction? What is your concerns? What do you see?
Well, and a question I'll probably pose to you afterward. I was just reading an article by a friend of mine, new friend, Shashank Bandali of the LA Times, just wrote on how this is being viewed in Asia toward the United States, where it's appearing in Singapore and Taiwan. Taiwan has a seventh of the infection rate per capita that we do. That our country is really, does not have it together yet, and has really bungled its response, and that's very worrisome, because obviously we look to political leaders in times of crisis to help lead the organizational framework. And Singapore has done a very good job. Taiwan, these places where, these are Chinese places, and despite it being called a so-called Chinese virus, by some bigoted view, in my view, we can learn a lot from how they've handled it. So I'd wonder, how you see it, and is our city leadership doing everything it can, and what might it do differently, if anything?
Rabbi, I have tried very hard to avoid being critical. I don't know that this is the right time for political jabs. What I've tried to do is sort of exalt the opportunities and examples of leadership that we have seen. I think when I talk to people, you hear them a little desperate for answers to their unanswered questions, for some calm, clear, compassionate leadership. That's a phrase I've started to use for what I think people want in moments like this. And candidly, look, I'm a lifelong proud Democrat. But whatever party you are, I think the governor's response to this has really been a case study in leadership. I said that privately to my team the first time he had one of his press conferences, and a few days later when he had sort of a repeat performance of that tone of voice to both indicate that things are under control, but that things are very much in an urgent crisis posture, and that they're taking it that seriously. There's going to be some examples looking back on what we could have done better. There's no question about that. At the local level, at the national level, there's no question about that. Earlier today, I read and I tweeted out on our campaign account that the percentage increase in the United States this past week has been more than twice as high as virtually every other country in the world except for the UK. That means we've gone up faster this past week than virtually any other place in the country. That's terrifying. And it's on all of us that we're not taking it seriously enough. I remember saying at some point that we're all making mistakes. In those early days, we were shaking hands and we shouldn't have been shaking hands. As a candidate, I felt compelled to respond when somebody reached their hand out. And it took a couple of days for me to learn that that was not appropriate. We were attending events that we probably shouldn't have been attending. We were all learning in those early days that the risks that we were subjecting ourselves to were unwarranted. I fear that that tone is set by our leaders and that this country is not taking it seriously enough. I think we're quickly catching up, but my goodness, the steepness of the curve is worrying. But it's not too late. This is going to be one of those circumstances where the curve is not preordained. We have very much control over the shape and the duration and the change of that curve. And the more quickly we realize that this is an appropriate way to have a conversation, but we don't need to be, we're not being unfriendly by not shaking hands. We're not being unfriendly by maintaining this distance. Quite the contrary.
Yeah, I think that's entirely true, 100%. And it's an adjustment process. Some people are quicker learners. Some people are quicker to pivot, and our role isn't to condemn each other, but to gently correct them, in a loving way. And sometimes, we need to repeat the message. There's a reason advertisers advertise over and over and over, because we have to get those messages through. I think, to your point, Governor Hogan has done a really admirable job. Governor Cuomo has done a terrific job. Governor Baker, Newsom. And hopefully before too long, all of our elected officials will be in a similar place of conveying the gravity that needs to be conveyed.
I think there are two things that I see in all of the examples you just gave. One of them is a steadiness. They're not criticizing failed leadership in other places. I'm sure that they privately are frustrated with leadership that they see in other places, but they're not focusing on that. They're actually focusing on delivering a clear message. And the other one is decisive judgment making. These are hard calls about when to close things down, when to sound the alarm, these are hard decisions. But what I've been impressed with is in each of the examples that you just mentioned, these are people that are making decisions sometimes one day earlier, one day later, but they're making these very difficult decisions after listening to experts, taking in that input, reflecting on the decision, and explaining it in a clear, lucid way to the people of their respective states. There was something that Governor Cuomo did that I thought was really powerful, which was remembering that even though we don't know how long this will be, a couple months, maybe longer, that in the grand scheme of things, it is this long, as I think he said. It's this long. It's not forever, it's this long. And whether it's a hockey season or baseball season or more, we will get through this. And we obviously need our faith leaders to help. And I am amazed by how the faith community has stepped up, not only to serve Baltimore, but to serve their particular congregations and their followers. It has been really, really encouraging to see that all across the city. I want to ask you if there's any other messages you want to get out. We wanted to make sure that people heard that the faith community is still continuing, and that for many of us, that turning to faith in a moment like this is helpful. It is hard for us, especially as extroverts, to go into a place where you're not interacting with people every day. And the faith is sometimes something that we can turn to for comfort, for solace, for guidance, for wisdom. I welcome your closing remarks on this.
I would say, even as an introvert, in counterpoint to you, Thiru, we all need connection, and we all find strength and sustenance in our relationships and other people, even if some of us might require that a little more for our energy. And not to be isolated physically as much as possible for reasons of safety, but connected socially and spiritually for reasons of our own inner well-being and contentment and an inner sense of peace. So there's a lot out there, and the human spirit is an incredibly innovative and creative one. There will be a lot more even coming, around the bend for us to plug into and find those outlets. Don't listen simply to the news all day long, because it can be quite overwhelming and dispiriting. Turn to some spiritual connections or practices like meditation, perhaps sitting in a group, just connecting and loving one another virtually, and we'll all get there, and we'll have learned a lot and ultimately come to that other side that Governor Cuomo was speaking of.
It's a beautiful message, and if I can just reinforce one point there, for those of us who need it, we should seek it out, to sort of seek out the opportunity to connect with others. For those of us who can give it, let's be sure to reach out to the people that we might not be thinking of. Our parents and grandparents, our aunts and uncles. You sometimes forget that the cost of a phone call when you're sitting at home with a TV show in the background is nothing, but it could really make a difference to remind them that there is opportunities for connection. And oftentimes when we talk about leadership, those of us aspiring to lead, we think about the big decisions. Do you cut down, repayments on student loans? Do you close down the bars and the hotels? What do you do about the homeless? Those are big questions. But we can also lead in small ways. We can lead in small ways by giving back, by making a phone call. Later today, we're going to be helping some folks that are recently unemployed file for unemployment insurance, and sort of what they do to go through those small things. Don't make the mistake of thinking that these little things don't add up. We need everybody to come together, and these little things will be how we get through this. I'm so grateful for your time. I'm so grateful for your leadership. I know your followers are as well, and maybe remember that this is only one of many, many struggles that all of our people have been through, and we will come out of this together and stronger, no doubt.
Amen. And thank you. Glad to be with you.
Glad to be with you. Thank you, everyone.